To what extent can a pilot endure injustice before exploding live on the radio? What would you do if your rival breaks the regulations right under your nose, and the FIA does nothing? The night in Singapore is dense. The asphalt of Marina Bay burns under the artificial lights, and the air carries that tension that is only felt when the race reaches its climax. In this maximum pressure environment, where every curve can mean a victory or a catastrophe, Fernando Alonso experiences the limit of his emotional and competitive tolerance. It is not the first time that the Asturian pilot is on the verge of emotional collapse, but this time, something is different. This time it's not just about losing positions or points. This time he feels like the entire system is failing around him. The critical sequence begins in the last laps of the Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, leader on the track, begins to experience a serious mechanical failure in his Ferrari SF25. The front brakes and in particular the left disc collapse. Sparks, smoke and overheating visible from the broadcast cameras. And yet, the British driver is still on the track. He doesn't go into the pits. He doesn't take his foot off the accelerator. On the contrary, he fights with an injured car, deliberately cutting corners, exceeding the track limits in the hope of reaching the checkered flag before being overtaken by Alonso, who approaches lap after lap like a shark smelling blood in the water. Alonso, from his Aston Martin AM-R25, sees the chaos unfold before his eyes. And with every second that passes without race direction acting, disbelief consumes him. First comes the silence, then the fury. Raw, unfiltered fury. A burst of 4 words that says it all: I cannot fucking believe it. Over and over again without restraint. A mantra that reveals the impotence of the pilot who has dedicated his entire life to precision and excellence, seeing how the regulations are bent to protect a rival. At that moment, it is not just Fernando Alonso who is speaking on the radio. He is the representative of all the drivers who have felt that the regulations change depending on the name that appears on the timing screen. He's not simply protesting runway limits. He is accusing the system of putting spectacle above security. Is it safe to race without brakes? He asks, not as a driver, but as a citizen of a sport that boasts of its commitment to human life and mechanical integrity. Because that's what was at stake in Singapore. Not just a place on the podium, but the credibility of the entire Formula One control system. Its engineer, Andrew Vizard, tries to contain the fire with diplomatic responses. We are reviewing the limits, we are monitoring the situation, he says. But every word seems like gasoline on the fire. Alonso is not looking for consolation. He is demanding justice. And he does so by citing background. He mentions how the day before, Hamilton had jumped a red flag in practice and was not penalized. What he is saying between the lines is clear. If your name is Lewis Hamilton, the regulations are interpreted lightly. If your name is Fernando Alonso, every maneuver is examined with a magnifying glass. There is a psychological dimension to this reaction that cannot be ignored. Alonso has built his career around total control of the car, of the strategy, of his environment. But at that moment, he doesn't control anything. Neither the pace of the race, nor the application of the regulations, nor even public perception, which is already beginning to polarize. That loss of control is what really destroys him, which makes him explode. Because for a pilot like him, losing control is not just unacceptable. It's intolerable. The moment is captured by cameras. It goes viral. And as with every emotional release in this hypermedia era, it is dissected, commented on, and manipulated. But what cannot be ignored is what he represents. A legendary driver in his final stage, facing not only his rivals on the track, but a system that, from his perspective, no longer respects his own principles. What Singapore showed was not just an emotional reaction. It was a statement, a scream in the middle of the noise. A driver who, after decades of struggle, demands that Formula One not forget what makes it great. Justice, safety, equal conditions. Alonso did not explode just because of what was happening on the track. He exploded because he felt that the sport to which he has dedicated his life no longer listens to him. And that is a betrayal that not even a world champion can endure. Every time Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton share the track, the air becomes thicker. It doesn't matter if they are fighting for a victory, a 10th position, or if they barely coincide in the classification. The emotional clash between the two transcends the timetable. There is something deep, almost ancestral in their rivalry, something that has not been cured. It is not a simple sports competition. It is a story without closure. To understand the magnitude of Alonso's outburst in Singapore 2025, you have to go back 18 years. Year 2007. A young Lewis Hamilton, newcomer to Formula One, breaks into Fernando Alonso's teammate at McLaren. Alonso, a two-time world champion at the time, had just dominated with Renault and hoped to consolidate his status as absolute leader in his new team. But he didn't expect that Hamilton would not only be fast, but also irresistible in the media. The balance of power within the team was broken from the first Grand Prix. That year ended in disaster for McLaren. The internal rivalry was so toxic that the team lost the Constructors' Championship, and both Alonso and Hamilton were left out of the fight for the title, which was won by Kimi Räikkönen. But the real damage was psychological. Alonso felt betrayed. Hamilton found himself challenged. The Cold War was on and it never ended. Since then, both have followed opposite careers, occasionally crossing paths as if fate made them eternally orbit around each other. Hamilton became a multiple world champion, Mercedes star, global image of the sport. Alonso, for his part, became the symbol of resilience, changing teams, fighting with inferior cars, but always maintaining the essence of a gladiator. What is happening in Singapore is not an isolated episode. It is the last spark of a bonfire that never went out. And the detail that cannot go unnoticed is the emotional content that permeates each interaction between them. When Alonso says on the radio, he can't drive as if he were alone on the track, he is not just referring to Hamilton at that moment. He refers to what, in his perception, has been a constant for almost 2 decades. A driver who competes under different rules, or at least with a tolerance that was never granted to him. And Hamilton, of course, knows it. The publication he made on social networks after the GP is a surgical blow. He does not respond with inflammatory statements, he does not enter into a head-on fight. Post a clip of a British character saying, "I don't believe it," accompanied by the caption, 18 years of. It is a response loaded with intention. You don't need to mention names because everyone understands. It's about his relationship with Alonso, of what they drag. And he does it with the confidence of someone who knows that the narrative, many times, is on their side. In Singapore, this conflict is reopened in the crudest way. With Alonso overflowing with frustration, and Hamilton showing that he is still in control even through sarcasm. It's as if the past had never been resolved. As if every curve they share, every wheel that rubs reactivates old wounds. And this is what keeps their rivalry alive for fans. Because it is not a simple sports fight. It is a war of principles, of values, of personal stories that collide in each Grand Prix. The confrontation in Singapore was just the excuse. The fuse had been lit for almost 2 decades, and what we saw that night was not a tantrum or a provocation. It was a living memory. A story that, no matter how much Formula One advances, refuses to die. Because as long as Alonso and Hamilton remain on the grid, that rivalry will be an invisible axis that always conditions everything. There are battles fought with cars, overtaking and fast laps. But there are others that are won in silence, with a measured publication, with a cryptic phrase, or with an image so calculated that it becomes a dart sharper than any maneuver on the track. Lewis Hamilton masters both arts. Not only has he been one of the most successful pilots in history in sporting terms, but he has perfected the art of psychological warfare, the mind game, until it became an extension of his piloting. And his response after Fernando Alonso's outburst in Singapore was a masterclass in narrative control. One day after the Grand Prix, as the paddock continued to burn over Alonso's leaked radio conversation, Hamilton did what he does best. He took control of the narrative without saying a single direct word about the incident. His social media post was simple, seemingly harmless, but brutally effective. A video of actor Victor Meldrew, known for the phrase, "I don't believe it," repeated over and over again. And as a cherry on top, a legend, 18 years of. That was it. The most worrying thing is that the FIA seems to have lost its moral authority within the paddock. Decisions are no longer perceived as technical, but political. Powerful teams seem to have a different margin of tolerance, drivers with greater media influence seem to escape sanctions, and stewards change their criteria depending on the context. What should be an impartial body has been transformed, in the eyes of many, into a bureaucratic entity that responds more to the pressure of spectacle than to the sporting principle. And that perception has real consequences. When pilots begin to believe that the rules are not applied equally, they change their behavior. They begin to test the limits knowing that the penalty will depend more on the name on the helmet than on the maneuver itself. Engineers, for their part, design strategies knowing that there may be interpretable gray areas, and teams learn to play with loopholes in the regulations. The result is a less sporty and more theatrical Formula One, where the script seems to be written both in the FIA offices and on the circuits. Do you really think Alonso was wrong to explode the way he did? Or do you feel that it was the only way to make visible a problem that F1 has been dealing with for years? Are we witnessing the inevitable evolution of a sport that surrenders to entertainment? Or are we losing the essence that made it the pinnacle of motorsport? Leave me your opinion in the comments. Don't leave without sharing what you think is happening with this sport.